Welcome, everybody. I'm Tim Harder. I'm our Chief Investment Officer here at Quotient Wealth Partners. We're going to be talking about year-end tax considerations. I'm joined by Markham Hawkins. Welcome, Markham.
Thanks, Tim. My name is Markham Hawkins. I'm a managing partner here at Quotient Wealth Partners. And Tim, it's that time of year. We're sitting down with clients. We're looking at their tax planning. We're projecting out what they need to do. So I'm excited to dive in with you here.
Perfect. So today, I think we're going to cover just what you're talking about, some of those year-end tax planning strategies. We're also going to focus in maybe what you're doing on the investment side of things. We'll talk a little bit about charitable deduction or charitable contributions and maybe ways that can be deductible for you. And then I think the last thing that we're going to be speaking on is sort of this One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Typically, when you have a big tax bill passed, you're always focused on what is changing. But the biggest news out of this one wasn't what changed, it was what stayed the same. And so maybe start there with what was the biggest thing that actually stayed the same?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tim. And I think one of the most important things that stayed the same is the actual tax brackets. Because when you think back to 2016, which is when we entered kind of the zone of tax brackets that we're in today, a couple of things happened. Not only did we lower the actual percentages on a few of the brackets, but they also expanded them. So when we were doing planning throughout this year, a lot of advisors were under the expectation that the current tax code would sunset and we'd at least go back to where we were before 2016, which would generally mean higher taxes for a lot of our clients. So when you're talking about the most important thing that stayed the same, I think it's just the general tax brackets themselves. And this administration calls it permanent, but I would say we're pretty sure that it'll be throughout this administration at least.
Yeah, we got so at least a permanent 4 years.
Exactly.
As we go through. There was another tax that doesn't impact as many people, but people were on the lookout because the change was so dramatic. You want to talk a little bit about what happened with the estate tax?
Yeah, and that's a big one because as a financial planning firm, we also do a lot of estate planning with our clients. And there's something called the estate tax exclusion. And really, Tim, what that means is when you pass away, there's a certain amount of money that unless you're over it, you don't have to go in and pay those federal estate taxes. So for a lot of our clients, you have to plan for that. You have to look at trust planning and other types of ways to avoid that. But one of the things that stayed the same through the One Big Beautiful Bill is that exclusion. So if I'm single, I have up to $15 million before I go into that federal estate tax range. If I'm married, I have up to $30 million.
All right, so a lot more clearance. So really, at the end of the day, what it means is most people, everybody that doesn't have $30 million in their estate, if they're a married couple, will not have to worry about estate taxes.
Exactly.
Okay,
right.
Perfect. All right, so one other thing that changed, and I remember this because I think a lot of our clients had a lot of tax work to do each and every year because one of the things they had to fill out was a Schedule A to itemize their deductions, and lo and behold, not very many do that anymore. So I think what else happened, I guess that's the last piece of the OBBA in terms of things that stayed.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. If you go back before 2016, I think a lot of our clients were in this world where they would come in and do itemized deductions. What happened in 2016 is the standard deduction increased quite a bit. And so that put a lot of our clients in this range where they didn't need to itemize anymore, or they just couldn't itemize anymore. And one of the things that we were really watching with this bill is, would we go back to a place where we would be going in and itemizing, or would we stay with this trying to make it simpler? Here's a big standard deduction, and can you get above it? And what happened is the standard deduction stayed high.
Okay, so that's what stayed high, and what stayed the same. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that changed, and I think one of them is directly related to that item of the deductions.
It is, Tim, and I think this one really plays for a lot of our clients. We're a retirement planning firm. We have a lot of what the IRS would define as a senior citizen, and that just means you're 65 or older. And last year, before the One Big Beautiful Bill, if I was a single senior, I got a $2,000 deduction. So starting this year in 2025, they're adding an additional $6,000 deduction to that. So that would take me as a single individual up to $8,000. Last year, if I was married, it was $3,200. They added an additional $12,000 to that, which now takes us up to $15,200. So that's a bonus that you see right away, but it also goes back to what we were just talking about, the idea of this large standard deduction, because that's just more money on top of that I would need to get to itemize.
Yeah. So it makes it a bigger hill to climb for the seniors to cover the standard deduction. But on the plus side of it is there's $15,000 if you're a married couple both over the age 65, where you are now $15,200 of tax-free income, which is pretty incredible over and above the standard deduction, which you're getting already. So you've got quite a bit of money you can make before you pay $1 in taxes. That's crazy. So one of the things that also happened with the increase in the standard deduction to try to balance out that bill last time when it was passed in 2016, I think was the elimination or at least extreme reduction in the number of things that you could actually deduct, one of them being these SALT taxes. You want to explain what the SALT taxes are and what the changes are that have been made?
Yeah, and that's another part of this bill that I think could affect clients right away. Because what happened in 2016 is they really took those state and local tax deductions down, and that's what we refer to as the SALT deductions. And where it was before this bill was at about $10,000. And what the bill did is it increased that to about $40,000.
Okay, so now you've got people in high tax states or people with high property taxes that might be looking at this and saying, maybe this, if I do itemize it, might exceed my standard deduction. Okay, and it's trickier than that too, because I think there are a lot of phase outs, so everybody's situation is a little bit different as we move forward. So knowing that there have been some of these changes, what are some of the things you're starting to talk to clients about today that you didn't have to talk to them about last year or were much less relevant anyway?
Well, I think one of the main things we've been discussing is this idea of bunching. And what is that? So let's say that you live in a state that has high property taxes and you're just kind of wired to pay those property taxes in maybe April. And then you go out to the next April and you pay them again. Well, what you might want to start thinking about now is making 2 of those payments in one single year. So then when you're coming in and you're doing your taxes, that might be able to get you to that itemized part to take advantage of that deduction. So for example, Tim, let's just say that your property taxes are $30,000 a year, and that typically wouldn't get you to an itemized place. Well, if we went ahead and paid April's this year, and then in December we prepaid for next year, then maybe that does get you to that itemized place so you could see that deduction. So I would just suggest sitting down with your tax advisor, financial advisor, and kind of understanding how that works.
Okay, perfect. And then are there some other strategies sort of, in addition to sort of bunching these, are there other things that you can be doing to sort of, I guess, control either your income or your deductions? And I know a lot of times this is the time of year people start thinking about their charitable gifting and planning strategies around that, because I know there's some strategies there that you're talking to clients about.
Yeah, there absolutely is. I mean, one of them is just, where does your money come from? A lot of our retirees have saved in different places. They have Roth money, they have IRA money, they have brokerage account money. All of those things are taxed differently. So this idea of projecting your taxes out and understand where your spending is coming from, because at one point of the year it might make a lot of sense to do IRA money to spend there, so you're maxing out maybe those lower brackets. And then as you pass through to higher brackets, maybe that's where you turn on your Roth spending or you look at the brokerage account side.
Perfect. And then in terms of getting to some of those itemized deductions. I know there are the state and local taxes that we can deduct. There's very few things that you can deduct anymore, even when you itemize, but one of them is charitable gifts.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the ways that people can sort of maybe use that same sort of bunching strategies when they're thinking about their charitable gifting?
Yeah, and Tim, there's a vehicle called a donor advised fund. And in the world that we live in, this is actually a fairly new thing. It came about around the same time as these brackets came in 2016. And the idea of it is, let's say that I'm a client. It's important to me to do some charitable gifting, but I'm doing $5,000, maybe $10,000 a year. So when you go back to this idea of the standard deduction, it's important to me to gift, but it's not helping me from a tax standpoint because I'm not gifting enough to go into the itemized side. What you can actually do is you can donate money to what's called a donor advised fund. And these funds generally exist for if I'm having a high income year. Maybe it's a liquidity event, maybe it's an inheritance, maybe I sold some stock that is not something I do every single year. But what I could say is, Tim, I know I'm going to give this $10,000 a year gift, so I'm going to take $100,000, I'm going to put it into a donor advised fund, and then what that does is it gives me the deduction of that $100,000 this year, but once it goes into the donor advised fund, I can decide when and who I give it to. So I can give that same $10,000 over the next 10 years, I can decide who it's going to go to, but I get that full deduction in the year that I really need it. And one of the best parts about a donor advised fund is I can also use my most appreciated securities. So if I have stock that's done really well over the last couple years, then I put that in my donor advised fund. I don't pay the taxes. The charity it eventually goes to doesn't pay the taxes, so I'm getting another tax break there.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Yeah, because I think that's always a key when you're talking about charitable giving. Always give something that's appreciated. You can always turn around with your cash and replace it if you're thinking about giving with cash.
Exactly.
There's I think also a little bit of a change that's going to happen to the charitable gifting rules for next year. You want to talk a little bit about those? It's pretty nuanced, and it only affects these people that are going to try to itemize, but
yeah, and that's a great point because there is a bit of a change coming in 2026 with donor advised funds. And what it is they're adding what's called a floor. So in essence, they're taking away a little bit of the deductibility in 2026 because what they're doing is they're looking at your AGI, they're taking that by 0.5%, and they're saying until you get above that, then it's going to take a bit of the deduction out of that donor advised fund. So Tim, if you're thinking about doing that, I think this year could be a great year to do it. But donor advised funds are not something you can wait until April to do. It has to be funded by December 31st of 2025 to avoid the changes.
Right, and if you're trying to do that in advance, you don't have that account set up, you want to get that done in advance, especially if you're trying to transition or transfer a highly appreciated asset into it.
Yeah, and Tim, we have relationships with both Fidelity and Schwab, and what they tell us is we really want that donor advised fund created at the beginning of December. So we're talking quick.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so immediately, essentially. Are there other ways to? So there's, in addition to maybe gifting through a donor advised fund, some of our folks also are starting to get into that age of life where they're required to take distributions from their IRA. Do you want to talk a little bit about an alternative strategy, maybe one that doesn't involve itemization in your taxes and a deduction, but another way to get your money out of your IRA tax-free if you're giving it away?
Yeah, Tim, there is another strategy that we use for a lot of clients, and it's called a qualified charitable distribution. And really, if you think about who this makes sense for, we work with a lot of corporate executives. How do corporate execs traditionally save? They put money in their 401ks because they're getting a match there. That makes a lot of sense. So for a lot of our clients, there's a lot of pre-tax dollars. Some of them had lump sums, which were also deposited into those qualified accounts. So really, they get in this position where they have a lot of money in IRAs, these pre-tax dollars, and when they reach a certain age, they have to take what's called an RMD. An RMD is a required minimum distribution. And really what that is it's the IRS saying, Tim, we want you to pay your taxes, not your kids. So they start making you take a distribution out of those accounts. And for a lot of our clients at first, it fits with their financial plan. But the older you get, the more the IRS has you take out. So we have clients that get into a position where those RMDs are actually more money than they need. So they're basically taking money out, paying taxes, reinvesting it. And that's not an extremely efficient way to do this. So using those QCDs, the other thing you can actually do is earmark part or up to just over about $100,000 of your RMD and go ahead and gift that to a qualified charity. Now, I say this to almost every client. Unfortunately, our kids are not qualified charities.
Charities just not qualified.
Right. So that's not something that counts. But this is a very efficient way to gift money and remove it from your taxable income if you are in those RMD ages.
All right, perfect. And then you talk about gifting. You just talked about gifting to kids. So this is something else that comes up every year. You talked a little bit about this estate tax and this exclusion. When you've got people that are thinking generationally and thinking about how do they support their kids even beyond college, I guess, and into the next generation, what are some of the things you're talking about with them today?
That's a great question, because something that we talk a lot about in our financial planning process is the why. Why did you save this money? What do you want to do with it? What makes you feel good? And what are your goals? And we have a lot of clients that their why is their kids, their grandkids. So it's not just charities, but we talk about this idea of gifting with warm hands instead of cold hands, right? Being able to enjoy it, being able to see the grandkids go to school. And so one of the things that we have to go at is, how do you gift? And part of the new bill is you're allowed to gift $19,000 per person. So I could gift you, Tim, $19,000. If I'm married, my spouse could give you $19,000.
By the way.
And if you do that amount or less, there's no paperwork. You don't have to worry about them paying taxes, you paying taxes. You just gift the money, and that's that. Now, we talked about this idea of the estate tax exclusion at the very beginning of the presentation. And a lot of my clients will come to me and they'll say, Markham, I really want to gift more, but I don't want to hinder my kids to receive this gift. And that's because they don't really understand how it works. So with the estate tax exclusion where it is today, let's say I'm married and it's at $30 million, I could come in and I could gift you, Tim, $100,000. And what would that do? Well, I would let my CPA or my financial planner know about it. There's a form that's filed with my taxes saying how much over that $19,000 that I gifted you. And what it does is it just lowers that estate exclusion from $30 million to whatever it is I gifted over that $19,000 limit. So it's still something that's very doable, and we do push a lot of our clients to do it that
so that
direction.
estate and gift exclusion. I think you see that sometimes. You're usually talking about a lot of times big purchases. You might be helping somebody with a down payment on their home, those types of things. So yeah, it's good to know that you don't have to be completely restricted by those annual limits. Okay, this is stuff that's near and dear to my heart. As a chief investment officer, I think about investments a lot. And one of the key things that we think about for our clients, it's not just the money that you make, it's the money you keep. And so really being tax smart on your investments is vitally important. It really does impact your net returns. What are some of the things you're going through today at this time of year with your clients to make sure they're maximizing their after-tax returns on their money?
Yeah, and Tim, one of the most important ones that I want to talk about is this idea of harvesting losses. You hear a lot about this, and I think in general, a lot of people don't understand what it is, because think about this year. Stock market's up, bond market's up. We've had a great year in the markets, and so a lot of people just think, oh, the markets were good, there's nothing to harvest. And maybe that's true, but also maybe it's not. there's a lot of new ways of investing that we're doing with our clients, like direct indexing. And Tim, I know you're a big proponent of this, but traditionally, if I wanted to invest in the S&P 500, as our chief investment officer, you'd say, Markham, here's a great index fund. You can get all 500 of those stocks weighted the exact same way, and you'll be in a very low-cost, good position. Well, if I'm someone that's looking for losses over time, maybe I do that a little bit differently. And I actually go in and I buy a portion of those 500 stocks weighted the same way. But it's this idea of direct indexing. And what that does is it gives me the ability to harvest losses even when the index itself is up, because we know that a lot of single stocks drive the performance in the S&P 500. So we may be up 10% of the year, but there still could be some losses available for us to go in and harvest. So what I would say to that, Tim, is talk to your advisor, look at your investments, and just because the market's up doesn't mean there's not some instances where harvesting can make sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really insightful, and people don't think about the ways to maybe create tax losses. The other one is, we've got some folks, you mentioned ETFs and direct indexing. I think there's been a lot of evolution in terms of how people invest today versus maybe how we invested a decade ago or 2 decades ago. And for taxable investors, sometimes those tax implications keep you from making changes. But one of the things that we used to invest in 20 years ago, a lot of times, was mutual funds. Yeah. And, what we're seeing today is they're maybe less tax efficient. What are you talking to clients about today that maybe have these mutual funds, and what are some of the issues that they're facing?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Tim, because what we do throughout the year is we run tax projections. So we do everything we can to understand what your income is going to look like. We're looking at if you're still working, we're building in your paycheck stubs, we're looking at your dividends, and we're trying to understand, okay, based on where you are, what's available to us? Are there some ways to get to itemizing? We just want to know where you fall in those brackets. And one of the things that can really surprise a client is if they have mutual funds that are active investments, because what happens is those mutual funds are based on an objective. And unfortunately, that objective is not going to be Markham's taxes. It's going to be growth, it's going to be income. And so too many times we'll run a full tax projection, and then we'll get to April and be like, what happened? And what happens in those mutual funds is as we get to the end of the year, they make trades. And on a year like this, when there's been a lot of equities that are positive, that means they're going in and probably realizing gain. So you just need to have a good idea and a good buffer built into your tax projection that these things can take you by surprise.
Yeah, and I was going to say, one of the things that we do a lot of times for clients when we see that they have this is we try to do some things to slow down that problem going forward. So you turn off things like dividend reinvestment, and then you take advantage once they pay those big capital gains out. So also at this time of year, you talk about all these projections that you're doing with the clients, trying to understand where they sit for this tax year. But we also know that, each of their account types is taxed a little bit differently, and sometimes we're trying to be proactive going forward. And I think, people are starting to kind of understand this next strategy a little bit better. But would you talk a little bit about what you do on like the Roth conversion side of things?
Yeah, and Tim, I think this is a really important question, because out of all the work I've done with our clients, I think Roth conversions can be the most powerful. And I'm seeing that today because we really started doing Roth conversions about 10 years ago. And it takes a while to see what you're doing. And so what I'd like to do is kind of walk through what a Roth conversion is, and then we can talk a little bit about who it may make sense for. Because what a Roth conversion is it's the idea of, Tim, you're retired, you have money in an IRA account, and what you want to do is you want to take money out of your IRA and you want to move it into a Roth. Now, when you do that, the IRS is going to say, Tim, we're happy for you to do that because you're paying them. Think of it as kind of buying the government out of your life on that money as you're putting it into the Roth. And the idea there is now you've paid your taxes today. It's going to grow tax-free over the rest of your life. and it could potentially go to your beneficiaries on a tax-free basis. So there's a lot of good ideas behind it, but there's a lot of things you also want to pay attention to, because when you're doing a Roth conversion, you're adding income to yourself. So number one, you want to know exactly where you are in the tax brackets. There's some brackets where it makes a ton of sense. There's some brackets where it's more of a conversation. If you're in the 12% bracket, I think converting to Roth would be a very powerful thing to do. If you're up in the 37% bracket, it might be a little bit tougher to swallow paying those taxes today. There's also the IRMA side of it. A lot of our clients are getting close or in Medicare age. And when you're taking Medicare, the cost of your Part B is determined by your income 2 years prior. So what you don't want to do is do a huge Roth conversion, not understanding how it affects your Medicare, and then 2 years after having your cost really shoot up. So I'm not saying it might not be worth it, but you need to really dive down, look at your income, and not just look at the taxability, but also where else does that affect you?
Sort of the hidden tax. It's
Exactly.
It's not in your bracket per
Right.
se, but another additional cost that would hit you. So you talked a little bit about the Roth, and some people that are still working, one of the things that's available to them is what they call a mega backdoor Roth.
Yeah.
You want to just talk a little bit about what that is too, because I just want to make sure they're taking advantage of that.
Yeah, and the mega backdoor Roth is really important, Tim. I didn't come up with this name. I don't know where they come from, but there's two types of contributions. There's what's called a backdoor Roth, and there's what's called a mega backdoor Roth. And a lot of people know about a backdoor Roth. What that is it generally exists for people that are over the income limitations to just put their money into a Roth IRA every year. And remember, for conversions, there's no income limitations. The IRS always allows you to convert because they want your tax dollar. Now, for a backdoor Roth, maybe you make too much money, so you're putting money into a traditional IRA. As soon as it goes in, you're converting it to Roth before there's any type of growth that can happen on that money. And so that's a backdoor Roth. You can get those contribution limits in, but there's a new way that's really come about over the next couple years, which we're pushing clients to see if they can do. And that's the idea of a mega backdoor Roth. And that is something that exists for people that have 401k plans. So you work for a company, you have a 401k plan, and that 401k plan allows you to put in what's called after-tax contributions. And that can get a little bit confusing because people mix that up with their Roth contributions. But you have pre-tax, meaning you put $1 in your 401k, that whole dollar goes in, and you pay the taxes when you take it out based on your income level then. You have Roth, which you put $1 in your 401k if your tax bracket's 20%, 80 cents go in, and that money grows tax-free. And then you have after-tax. So after-tax is I'm putting money into my 401k, I'm paying tax on it, but it's not within those limits of pre-tax and Roth. It's usually above and beyond. And so let's say, Tim, that I put $10,000 above what I'm doing for my pre-tax and Roth stuff into my 401k. If my company allows for it, I can take that $10,000 and I can roll that directly into a Roth IRA.
Right. And so the advantage of that is you've already paid the tax on it, and you need to pay taxes on what you haven't paid tax on before when you do a conversion. But since you've already paid the tax, that amount, the additional tax is zero basically to do that conversion, or very limited maybe what.
That's exactly
Okay,
right.
perfect.
That's an advantage. And then the other advantage is just the sheer amount you can get into Roth. Because if you're just going in and doing contributions, it's pretty small. Depending if you're under 50 or over 50, it's around 6,500, maybe 7,500. But if you're actually going through this mega backdoor Roth, depending on what your plan allows, you could do an additional $20,000 a year that way.
Yeah, so very powerful stuff, and some of that's being proactive even going into the new year, because it may be a little late in the year for them to
Exactly.
get the taxes, to get that done for this year. All right, so we've talked about, I think we talked about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, sort of a lot of what stayed the same, which was the tax brackets, the estate tax, the higher standard deduction. Some of the things that did change, we did see the increase in the SALT limitations. So that's a big one for especially the people in the higher tax states, or people with higher property taxes might have the ability to do some deductions. We've got, you talked a little bit about the year-end tax planning. So we've talked about Roth conversions. We've talked about charitable contributions and doing them through qualified charitable deduction or distributions and donor advised funds. So I think a lot of things, and then of course just being really a tax smart or efficient investor in general, taking advantage of this tax loss harvesting and making sure you're set up for this year. So Mark, maybe just anything else you want to add in for our clients, or how can we help folks going forward?
Yeah, so for our clients, I think the big thing is to sit down with your financial advisor and change this idea of looking backwards at taxes, because that's how we're all wired. When I go see my CPA, I hand them everything that I have, and they say, "Hey, congratulations, Markham, you either owe money or you get money back," and you just kind of accept it. I think where we need to get is this idea of looking forwards, where we can sit down, have good numbers, project what this year, what next year is going to look like. Because when you're looking forwards, that's when you can start using some of these strategies. You can easily see, where should I take my money from? Does a donor advised fund contribution make sense this year? Should we try to harvest losses this year? What type of investments out there exist if 2026 is going to be a high income year for me? Because if you're getting toward the end of the year, before you're looking at a lot of these things, it sometimes can be too late. So if there's anyone out there that's watching this saying, I'd like to go through a process, at Quotient Wealth Partners, Tim, we do offer a complimentary 3-meeting process. We like to come in, go through a full financial plan with you, understand what your goals are, what matters to you. And then in that next meeting, we will dig into taxes, we will dig into investments, and just kind of show you where are you, and are there some things that we could do to improve the taxability of what you're looking at.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Mark. I really appreciate that. And if you want to get hear from us, or you want to get some of that consultation that Markham just talked about, please go visit our website or call us at the number below, or pick up this fancy QR code. We would love to talk to you and help you through this. Thank you.